Hello and welcome. You're tuned into BCB 106.6 FM or bcbradio.co.uk if you're listening online. I'm Shamim Akhtar and I will be with you for the next hour. On today's show, I am joined by a highly esteemed panel of guests, and we have come together to speak about the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. These 16 days take place annually from 25th of November to 10th of December, and this is an international campaign that aims to raise awareness of and prevent violence against women and girls. And of course, we are discussing a very sensitive subject today, and so we will be handing out some helpline numbers throughout the show for extra support. So without further ado, let me introduce my guests. First, we have Ravinder Nijjar, and Ravinder is the chair of Religions for Peace UK Women of Faith Network, a former member of the International Women's Coordinating Committee for the Global Women of Faith Network, and is also vice chair of Religions for Peace UK. Next, we have Simon Phillips, and Simon is an ambassador for the White Ribbon Campaign, which aims to mobilise men and boys to stand up against violence against women and girls. He's also a member of the Switch On to Women's Safety Project Group in Leeds, and Simon is a community engagement officer for the Leeds Jewish Housing Association and director of interfaith for the Leeds Jewish Representative Council. Also on today's show, we have Abda Khan. Now, Abda is no stranger to BCB, and she is a lawyer turned writer and author of Stained and Razia. Abda runs creative writing courses and undertakes creative projects. In 2019, she delivered writing workshops to survivors of domestic violence and female ex-prisoners. Abda is a Desi Blitz Arts Ambassador and won British Muslim Woman of the Year in 2019. Last but certainly not least, joining me is Reverend Jenny Ramsden. Jenny is Interfaith Advisor for the Bishop of Leeds. She delivers training for ministry in multi-faith contexts to clergy and lay leaders across the diocese and is actively engaged in building positive interfaith relationships. Alongside this role, Jenny has recently started working as a women's project coordinator for the Religions for Peace UK Women of Faith Network, with a particular focus on challenging gender-based violence. So it's so lovely to have you all here. And I have to say, my introductions haven't really done you justice because you do so much amazing work, but we'll talk about that throughout the show. But first, what I want to do is come to you, Jenny, and if you can explain in a little more detail about these 16 days of activism.
Yeah, sure. So the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, as you said, always begin on the 25th of November, which is actually the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women. And the origins of that day go back to 1960 and to the Dominican Republic. Because tragically on that day, on the 25th of November 1960, 3 sisters called the Mirabel sisters were assassinated, brutally assassinated, on the orders of the then Dominican dictator, Rafael Trujillo. And their crime, as it were, as he saw it, was that they highlighted his cruel regime, which had brought death actually to more than 50,000 of his own people. So nearly 40 years later, in 1999, a representative from that country, from the Dominican Republic, brought a resolution to the General Assembly of the United Nations that the 25th of November, that date when they were murdered, should be known as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women. And the UN adopted that resolution. And so now this date marks the beginning of 16 days of activism. And these are days really which provide individuals, but also groups, a chance to call attention to the urgent need to end violence against women and girls and to mobilise and kind of act together to challenge this. And so I think it's really moving, really, that what began as a protest by just 3 courageous women against a vicious dictator has become a justice call for women around the globe that takes place, as you said, every year now. from the 25th of November until the 10th of December, which is International Human Rights Day.
So such important work going on throughout the globe, as you've said, Jenny. I'm going to come to you, Ravinder. If you could tell us about the Religions for Peace UK Women of Faith Network that you're part of, a little bit about your role and some of the previous projects that you've done.
Hello, everyone. Religions for Peace is an international organization which brings together faith-based and interfaith-based organizations as a building block to work together for peace, but also looking at different issues where they can work together with social action. And the network, the Women's Network, brings together women-based organizations throughout the UK, but we also have a global Women of Faith network as well in all the different continents. Previous projects that we are having a look at now is, as everyone knows, the environment is a very, very hot topic. So how women of faith can work together to protect the earth, because Mother Earth is the one that gives us all our nourishment, our place to live for the whole of creation. So that we think is very important, a strategic sort of project for us. And the other project that which we will be talking about is having a look at how we can empower women and promote dialogue between women of faith and women who have belief and no belief as well, because women are women, how we can all work together for a more just, harmonious and peaceful society. And one of the projects we're going to be talking about is looking at the dignity of women, because there seems to be some sort of misconceptions that women of faith, religious women, can have violence perpetrated against them because it says so in the scriptures. But, you know, knowledge is power. If women don't have that knowledge as to what their scriptures say, then they can't challenge those misconceptions. So this is something that we will be taking forward throughout the year, but also specifically in the 16 days of activism.
So give us some examples of how you're aiming to challenge this and challenge gender-based violence with this particular project. What will you be doing?
Well, we have an exhibition which is called The Dignity of Women, Scriptural Reflections, which looks at the verses from the 9 world religions, what the scriptures say on the honor and status of women. So we have an event during Interfaith Week, which Jenny will be talking about on the 15th of November at the Blackley Centre, where people will be able to view the exhibition, look at the scriptures, try and see, you know, what are the commonalities, what are the differences, have dialogue with each other. And as I said before, knowledge is power. Now, in the olden days, it was only men who were able to read and write. And therefore, whatever was written in the scriptures was interpreted by men and then passed on to the women and their families as well. But now that, you know, most women can read and write, we want to overcome these attitudes that are held by, you know, throughout the centuries, that, you know, women are second-class citizens, that, you know, they shouldn't be allowed to do certain things, and it's okay to perpetrate violence against them. So in this way, we want to challenge that, because we want to have a look at what the founders of these religions said. How did they treat women? So men should be following that same role model. But I think throughout the centuries, that has got lost.
Absolutely. And as as a woman of faith myself, you know, it's when you delve into the religion yourself, you realize how in high esteem women are placed when it comes to faith. And as you say, it's about educating people. Do you find that as the generations are going on, that people are becoming more, or women are becoming more understanding of these scriptures? Or do you find it a challenge for the older generation to sort of explain to them? How are you finding it?
I think even though women are more educated, not all women that throughout the world are educated, in different parts of the world. I think, for example, look at Afghanistan, girls aren't allowed to go into school. So we have to be the voice of the voiceless. We have to try and get men to support and challenge the misrepresentation of religious verses within congregational sort of settings. The older ones, I think everybody needs to learn. I mean, I'm from the Sikh religion. My background is Sikh. And so Sikh means learner. So you are always learning. The other thing is sometimes women and young girls, because of the day-to-day roles that they have to carry out, they don't even have time to look at their own scriptures and to study their scriptures, to find these verses, to see what is written of them. And that's why we felt that we needed to have an exhibition and have developed educational toolkit to go with the exhibition so that people can see clearly and easily what is written about women.
Wonderful. Well, we'll come back to you, Ravinder. I want to come to you now, Abda. And what I want to ask, you've spoken before on BCB about some of the work you do to support organisations like the helpline. Can you just tell us a bit more about?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I don't actually volunteer on the helpline anymore, but it's something I did for a while. And then I was also trustee of Women's Aid down here in Birmingham. So yeah, the helpline was a real sort of, you can kind of call it an additional emergency line in a way, a bit like you ring the police or the ambulance or fire brigade. Well, for women who are seeing trouble in terms of domestic abuse, I think it is a really important, and I'm sure you're going to give out the numbers as well today. And it gives women the chance to ring and speak anonymously if they want to. They don't have to give their details. But if they need help, obviously, that is a way to get them help immediately or in the long term. Women ring with lots and lots of different issues, and it could be something that day that just broke the straw that broke the camel's back. It could be abuse that's been going on for years, but something happened that day. I remember once on the helpline, a woman rang and she'd endured quite a lot of abuse for quite a long time. She'd moved away with her husband and her child and was quite isolated and wasn't able to see any of her family or friends. On that particular day, her husband hit her in front of the child, and that's what tipped her over the edge. And she was kind of like cowering in the back garden, hiding from him in case he saw her. And then obviously gave her the advice that she needed, how to cover her tracks, everything. So I think what happens is sometimes it can be something awful that's happened that day, but sometimes it can be a build-up of so many different things. And I think the sad thing is that 2 women a week are killed by their partner or ex-partner in this country. And actually during lockdown, it was 5 women a week. And if you can just try and imagine, like 5 women every week during lockdown were killed. And, that just doesn't even bear thinking about, really. And 2 women a week, 1 woman a week is too many. The women in our society shouldn't be killed by their partners or ex-partners because, well, there's a multitude of reasons. There's no reasoning sometimes even. So it's a really complex situation because resources are really tight. Sometimes women get placed in accommodation that's so awful that they go back. I remember working on my project Sidelines a few years ago, and I worked with 2 refugees that housed women who were survivors of domestic abuse. And one of the women said that she went back twice before she finally left again, because she said that she was put into accommodation that was on the top floor. I think it was a 4 or 5 story building. There was no lift. She had 3 children under 3. She had no cooking facilities in her room. She had to take all the children down with her if she wanted to warm up milk or, you know, prepare their food. And you just can imagine, can't you, like up and down those stairs all day. She said the room was infested with cockroaches, and it was a horrible situation. And she said, you know, she said, I was this close to going back because I just thought, I can't put my kids through this. Like, I'll go back, I'll take the abuse because I just can't put my children through this. But luckily for her, she was put in touch with one of the workers from Women's Aid, and they got her into a refuge, and she felt so happy to be safe. But there's so much, there's so much pressure on the services at the moment. There are not enough spaces for the amount of women that are actually suffering abuse. So during lockdown, I remember doing a lot of shows. I think I did one with yourself, Shamim. I can't remember now. I think we did one about domestic abuse. Yeah, because the problem during lockdown was that there was no breathing space for the women. There was nowhere for them to escape to because the perpetrator was home all the time. So it was an incredibly difficult situation. And the figures, the figures speak for themselves. The fact that 5 women a week. Sometimes I think, I do despair because I think, what kind of a society do we live in where we don't really know this is happening maybe next door or down the street, or, what more can we do? And sometimes, people say things like, oh, but, she should just leave. Well, you can't, you can't understand that woman's position. Most women don't leave financially, they're not able to leave. That's the first thing. At the end of the day, financial power is immense. If one partner has all the financial power and the other partner has none, and I can't survive without that partner's, financial income, then it's very difficult. And secondly, I think the thing is, all you can do sometimes is empower the woman to make that decision when she's ready to make it. I think it takes 9 goes or something like that before they finally leave. I can't remember the exact figure. And the most dangerous time for women is when they leave. That's the most dangerous time in terms of the women actually getting, killed. So it's a complex picture. It's a difficult picture. And I think that now with things like the economic downturn and the cost of living crisis, I think that situation for the most vulnerable in society is worse than ever, to be honest.
It's such a difficult picture there, and as you say, it's not so easy for some of the women. It's easy for somebody to say, oh well, you should just leave, but it's not so. I'm going to come to you, Simon. Can you also tell us about some of the work you've done and continue to do in terms of challenging gender-based violence?
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for inviting me on. And it's actually quite an honour to be on this show with, such powerful and inspirational women. Look, I think we need to say at the start is that this is very much something which is based on statistics. We know that 6 out of 7 domestic violence victims are women. And I don't want to reel off statistics because behind each statistic, is a real victim. But nearly 50% of women have experienced groping. More than half of women in the UK have experienced some form of harassment in the workplace. And so I think what we need to remember here is that when we talk about violence against women and girls, there's everything that surrounds it. There's misogyny, there's domination, humiliation, emotional abuse, assaults, financial abuse. And a lot of these things are associated with what lots of people call toxic masculinity. So that's, in a nutshell, it's misogynistic behavior, it's archaic attitudes towards women, which might be manifested in religion, because we're talking about gender stereotypes. And often when we talk about gender stereotypes, often in a faith setting, that goes alongside things like sexism and homophobia, which could be the sort of the bottom of the pyramid, the first step, which might lead to verbal abuse, controlling behavior, threats and intimidation, and sexual harassment, and possibly sexual assault. So the point of mentioning that, and what I do is, it's really, really important to challenge culture, to challenge this toxic masculinity at an early stage, really. So in case people aren't aware, the White Ribbon Campaign is something which has its origins in Canada in 1991, when a male student called Mark Lepine attacked and murdered some female students, and his motivation was a hatred of women. And the White Ribbon Campaign arose out of that. And the White Ribbon Campaign in the UK has been in existence since 2005. And its main aim is to make men and boys, because this isn't just something which lies with men, it lies with teenage boys as well when in healthy relationships. It's a way of telling men, you need to stand up, you need to challenge the culture that might lead to abuse. You need to think about why women might feel harassed, why women might feel threatened or disregarded in all sorts of settings. So the type of work that I do is I talk to groups of young men, mostly in the Jewish community, but also in some other faith communities as well. I also run various road shows to a wide range of settings. Each year, as a matter of fact, my wife is involved in Jewish Women's Aid, who is the main Jewish referral service. We have a road show at our local branch of Sainsbury's, really, and we hand out information relating to Jewish Women's Aid, but also the White Ribbon Campaign as well. The other thing that I'm involved with, which is more Leeds-based, is it's the Leeds Women's Safety Project Group. And this arose out of some work that Women's Lives Leeds did a couple of years ago. And it was a set of questions about how safe women feel in Leeds. And it was all to do with experiences of harassment in a wide range of settings. And basically, to sort of summarize it, it said that women don't feel safe. And the reason for that is the attitudes of men. And so one of the aims behind Switch On to Women's Safety, which is the title of the workshop, is to increase the number of men who take an active role in women's safety. And it's all about this idea of active bystanders. It's about challenging things which might happen in a wide range of settings. It could be a throwaway comment, which might be meant in a very, very jokey way, but still needs to be threatened, where, there's a risk of a woman being physically assaulted. And it's about men realizing the different types of behaviors that may make women feel unsafe.
Thank you so much for that, Simon. And thank you for pointing out that violence doesn't necessarily mean physical all the time. There's lots of different forms of it, and women need to be aware. Thank you so much for that. What I do want to say is, if you would like to, if Simon and Abda, if you have any helpline numbers that you'd like to read out now, we can do so. So if Simon, if you have any helpline numbers that some of our listeners could reach out to.
Yes, so Jewish Women's Aid have a dedicated helpline. Let me just see. People can actually contact Jewish Women's Aid online. The way that the helpline is set up is that you can quickly come off the website if you don't want to be seen. But the main number is 0808 801 0500, or there is the web chat service, which is jwa.org.uk/web chat. Although Jewish Women's Aid mostly supports Jewish victims, and it's children as well. It's not just women. So if somebody else calls, then the team will be able to direct somebody to one of the more mainstream services.
That's great, thank you.
There's also the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which is 0808 2000 247.
Thank you, Jenny. And Abda, we can come back to you later if you have anything. You're tuned into BCB Radio, and this is me, Shamim Akhtar, with you for the next half hour. We're halfway through the show nearly now, and myself and my guests are discussing the international campaign of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and my guests are Jenny Ramsden, Simon Phillips, Ravinder Kaur Nijjar and Abda Khan. Now, Ravinder, I believe you have a helpline number as well?
Yes, I do. It's the Seek helpline, and the phone number is 0799 004 363. And you can go on the website www.silkhelpline.com.
Thank you very much for that. Now, Jenny, I'd like to come to you and ask you about the importance of faith communities standing together, coming together, to stand together to challenge gender-based violence.
Yeah, sure. So as we've heard, violence against women is sadly something that impacts every single faith community. I grew up witnessing domestic abuse, and so I know firsthand that it's something that really does impact people of all faiths, cuts across faith, culture, class. You know, it impacts women from every faith, every culture, and of every class. And so I think there's just such power in people from different faiths coming together to acknowledge that. And to say that it's something that we want to challenge together. We're all people of faith on this call now, and I think there's a power in us coming together to say this is something that's impacting all our communities, and we really want to challenge it together. I think this is really important. It actually also hopefully prevents the finger being pointed at any one particular faith community or communities. I can honestly see that for some faith communities who are perhaps more vulnerable in the UK, that it can be seen to be a risk perhaps to come out and say that violence against women is an issue in their community, because I can see that there must be a fear that that could be used as further ammunition against you and your community, if you like. So I think if we can come together as allies to each other and say, this is not just an issue for your community or your community, it's something that impacts my community and all of us, that then kind of empowers us to speak out and challenge it together. Yeah, so there's just such power in coming together to challenge it, I think.
And Jenny, what responsibility do you think community leaders have in raising this awareness?
Yeah, I think they have a huge responsibility in being the ones to acknowledge that it is something that happens in their faith community, and speaking out. There are various ways in which they can do that. One of the projects that our UK Women of Faith Network are doing over the 16 days is contacting male allies like Simon, and they will be community leaders and faith leaders, and we are asking them to produce short video clips from their own faith perspective, using their own religious scriptures, saying why violence against women is just not acceptable. And we are going to release those during the 16 days. And we hope that not only will those show that male faith leaders and community leaders are prepared to speak out against gender-based violence, we hope that it then empowers other men to do the same.
And Ravinder, this project, is it going to lead on to more projects? What is it sustainable? What's the future for it?
Yes, I think it will. It is sustainable. We've already done a couple of pilot sessions, and we found that women have been very, very interested to know what it says in their own scriptures and in other world scriptures as well. And they want to find out more by themselves. So that will continue themselves. And then we can also, they can also link in with women who are in the academic field and take that further, but also they'd be able to educate their children. And I think, you know, all these attitudes which men and boys have towards women are learned attitudes, and they can be unlearned. And this is what we should also call for, is within the education system, we should have parts of the curriculum which challenges these kinds of learned perceptions and learned misconceptions of attitudes toward women. I mean, for example, some of the things, you know, people have these myths that violence against women is religiously sanctioned. Well, no, it's not. All religions uphold the sanctity of life, and any abuse of women's rights is criminal and should be treated as such. And, if I give you a couple of examples of from the verses from the different religious scriptures, for example, Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh faith, he said the Creator pervades in all genders. So why should we belittle women and consider them lowly? And in Islam, in the Quran, it says, I shall not lose sight of the labor of any of you who labors in my way, be it man or woman. Each of you is equal to the other. And I particularly like from the Baha'i scriptures. It says, the world of humanity has two wings. One is women and the other men. Not until both wings are equally developed can the bird fly. Should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. So these are just a couple of a few of the scriptures, the religious scriptures verses. There is a lot to be learned and a lot to be unlearned from centuries of men telling women what it says in their religion about them.
Thank you for giving those beautiful examples, Ravinder. Abda, I want to ask you about the books that you've written. Now, you wrote a book called Stained, which highlights a particular subject. Tell us about what led you to go down that. Tell us about your journey writing that.
Yeah, so Stained was really born out of my frustration with the lack of sort of fiction dealing with some of the serious issues that happen within our communities, and they happen in all communities, but obviously my own background, I was kind of focusing on my own community, and that was the concept of so-called, family honor, and the lengths that sometimes, in this particular book, the lengths the character goes to preserve that family honor, and the pressure on women to carry the burden of honor. I think, this concept of honor as a responsibility of the woman isn't in any scripture. It's not in any religion. It's a man-made thing, It's been designated as the woman's role by men. For as long as we can remember, and it exists in all communities to a lesser or a larger degree. The pressure is there on women to behave in a certain way, not to bring the family honor into disrepute, not to act in any way that sullies the family's reputation. So that novel was really to explore that concept and look at it with under like a microscopic lens almost through the eyes of the character, and actually try and help people to understand how difficult it is for a young woman to carry that burden. She ends up making decisions that affect the rest of her life. So really, it was born out of the frustration that I'd come across these problems. A lot of women that I'd come across. Rape. There's a big rape culture in this country. It's a big problem. Rape. The rates of rape are at all-time high. Rates of convictions are at an all-time low. It's something like, I can't remember the exact figure, 0.6%, something like that, end up in a conviction. That's just, that it's not even, it's shameful, really. It's really shameful, and a lot of rapes don't even get reported. Again, it's that thing about shame and dishonor, and also that idea that you have to go through that whole process, and most unlikely that you'll even get a conviction. So why are we allowing rape culture to continue to in this country? What are we doing wrong? Why are more women being raped than last year and the year before? What's going on? And when you look at some of the scandals that happen, immediately it seems to be the defense of the men. So my daughter was at Warwick Uni a couple of years ago. She finished a couple of years ago, and I don't know if you remember, there was a bit of a scandal about some WhatsApp messages, some group texts that some boys had been sending to each other, talking about raping girls. And when this all came out, horrendous messages, awful. And when this came out, and there had been some rapes on campus, that's the thing. You know, they were just not funny, these messages. So when this came out, the university immediately protected the boys and said they wouldn't, you know, expel them or whatever, chuck them out of university. And the women, like young women, like including my daughter, were out protesting and saying, you know, how can they not be reprimanded for saying things like this? It's just, you can't joke about raping women and girls. It's not funny. Like, it's, so, you know, it just shows you the kind of culture that exists amongst some, not all, obviously. There are lots of nice, polite young men as well, but the culture that exists amongst some young men and boys as well at school. And I think, you know, Ravinder's right. We need to start early. We need to start when they're young. We need to start changing mindsets. We need to make sure that, you know, we teach them a balanced perspective about respect for each other's space and respect for each other's bodies, and, you know, just generally, you know, how to respect each other, men respecting women, women respecting men. So I think for me, that writing that novel was a way to try and like just highlight those issues, and it had such a profound effect on so many people. I genuinely had letters from so many women who shared their stories. Some even reported their rapes to the police. Some had kept quiet about the abuse they'd suffered, and then they opened up for the first time. These are the kind of like responses I had. So for me, it was kind of like worth a year writing that book. Just if it helped, it helped. It did help some women, but, you know, if it did help women, then that was definitely worth it. I think that, you know, the culture is what needs to change. It exists in every community, and this is not just about a South Asian or a Muslim problem, or, you know, an English problem. You know, it's the problem of sexual assault and rape it pervades all areas and all communities. And I think that there's a serious cultural problem that we have that allows rape to continue to increase.
Absolutely. And as I said at the start, this is a very difficult topic to discuss, and it can be very distressing for some of our listeners. So if perhaps everybody could read out those helpline numbers again, that would be...
Can I just can I just give another number? This is specifically for honour people suffering from so-called honour abuse. It's Karma Nirvana, and it's 0800 599 247. That's 0800 599 247. And I also have a number for Muslim Women's Network, which is 0800 999 5786. That's 0800 999 5786.
Thank you. Ravinder, if you could just read out the number.
There's Sikh helpline 07 999 004363.
Thank you. And Simon?
Yeah, I just want to say that it's really important to stress that whilst the helplines exist, if anybody needs help in an emergency, they should always call the police on 999. But the Jewish Women's Aid Helpline, it's 0808 801 0500. As I said, there's also the web chat, which is jwa.org.uk/web chat.
Thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, there's the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which is 0808 2000 247. There's also Staying Put, who offer support for domestic and sexual abuse, and their number is 0808 2800 999. And just to say that they're free and confidential, these helplines, and the call won't show up on itemised bills.
Thank you. And as Simon stressed, please do call 999 if you are in immediate danger.
Yes, I just wanted to stress, you know, that we do need male allies to help this issue. And one of the things that the Women of Faith Network want to do with this project, Women's Empowerment, Peace and Dialogue project, is to have male ambassadors who will go into their congregations and talk about, the challenges that women face, and talk about the issues and the attitudes that are prevalent within communities, and have those ambassadors talk to other men as well. So I'm really delighted that Simon is with us and talking about the White Ribbon campaign. But we need every male, every young person to be talking about this and to be challenging others when they hear it.
Absolutely. And if I can come to Simon, as Ravinder said, you are a male ally. Tell us how you raise awareness on this, and what's the response that you've received?
So I would completely agree with what Ravinder says, and I think what's important to say here is this shouldn't just be the obvious religious leaders, the imams, the rabbis, the religious leaders, because people probably expect them to lead on that, and obviously those are credible voices. It's really, really important that lay leaders challenge attitudes as well, and in some cases challenge religious leaders. Often what might happen is you might raise an issue to do with violence and abuse, and the response from a religious leader might be, well, it says this here, or, well, don't challenge my authority. But it's really, really important to challenge that. So in my experience, when I've spoken to groups of young people, there's some interesting reactions. I once spoke to a group of 14 or 15-year-olds. It was a mixed group, actually. And I was talking to them about how would you define a healthy relationship. I was talking to them about sexism, about misogyny, what they felt were positive and negative traits. And, the boys were very quiet, and there was sort of a sniggering. And it was the girls who took it very, very seriously. And I think that's probably symptomatic maybe of, teenage boys who perhaps don't want to exhibit the typical unmasculine behavior of, expressing views which are perhaps emotional, compassion, empathy. And I thought to myself afterwards that if I probably spoke to one or two of those boys on my own, they'd probably get this. I wouldn't say they'd say, well, you're talking a load of rubbish, or women ask for it, or any of the stuff that we might actually hear. Now, once or twice, I've also spoken to groups of students as well. Now, people might remember that a few years ago, there was something in the news about one of these American-style fraternities. It was St Andrews University in Scotland. And reports came out of women who had been victims of groping, which is a form of sexual assault, of course, rape, all sorts of harassment-related remarks. And fortunately, the chapter in Leeds that I spoke to, there was completely innocent. But I think it's really, really important to speak to male students, because obviously you're in that environment, perhaps first time away from home. And, alcohol is easily available, and very easily somebody who might be a very, very, normal and ethically upstanding individual might do something which is completely wrong. So I do that as well. But for me, it's about the importance of challenging people as early as possible. And this goes back to the active bystander. It's no use somebody saying something and then you think, well, I should challenge that, but then the day after you challenge it, because actually you don't know whether the woman or girl who's had that comment directed against them has thought, nobody challenged this, so they must think it's okay. I feel really vulnerable now. So it's the importance of challenging things at a very, very early stage. I think the other thing I would say, and this picks up on previous points about education, is that I don't know about in other faiths, but in Judaism, just before a couple get married, there are marriage classes. There's a class for women, there's a class for men. And largely it focuses around what are the duties of husband and wife. But I'm pretty sure that those classes do not talk about domestic violence and domestic abuse, certainly from the male point of view. And I'm pretty sure that when a young man is approaching his bar mitzvah at the age of 13, that as well as learning the portion of the Torah, the Jewish scripture, I'd be pretty sure that there's nothing about, and to be a good man, you need to show respect towards women in Judaism. I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen. It's something I would like to happen. It's something I've spoken to a couple of local rabbis in the community about, but as yet, that's missing.
Thank you, Simon. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is that it is about educating women about the scriptures, but something that I've personally experienced in my community is people of, say, my mum's generation were brought up by their own parents to believe that their husband, father, brother is the master of the house and he must be obeyed. So when they go into their husband's home, that's what they would replicate. And that's what they then pass on to their daughters and daughter-in-laws. Ravinder, would you agree with that? And if so, what can be done about that? Or is there anything that can be done?
I would agree with that. Sometimes, yes, that happens. But I think we have to differentiate between what has been passed down culturally and what is passed down religiously. Okay, so sometimes religious and culture get mixed up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we have to make sure that, you know, as Simon was saying, that sometimes, you know, religious leaders are complicit in it, you know, do as I say, this is, you know, the gospel, you need to follow that. But if women have the knowledge, what it says within their scriptures, or as to how they should be treated with honor and respect, they can even challenge these religious leaders and leaders at the local level and community leaders. So it is essential for them to know what is written about them so that they can challenge men at every level, at every point, and they can differentiate and say, well, this is culture. This has been passed down through centuries or through hundreds of years, and I'm not doing that anymore. And even if it's religious, they can say, yes, well, it says this in the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or the Guru Granth Sahib. Knowledge is power. Until women have that power, they are not going to be able to challenge men who have these attitudes.
Absolutely. Now, the hour is going so fast where we've only got about 10 minutes left. But what I do want to ask, Jenny, if I can start with you, how can we all, as individuals and as communities, what do you think are the ways in which we can challenge gender-based violence in practice, or, you know, by raising awareness? What are the things we can do? Because sometimes people can feel, well, this is really too big for me as an individual, but are there little things? What would each of you say to people? So we'll start with you, Jenny.
So for me, it is probably quite a personal one, and it is that if you have got a voice and feel like you can use it to speak up, then do so, because not everybody has that voice. So I've sort of mentioned previously that I grew up witnessing domestic abuse. Now, that is not an easy thing for me to say, and I wouldn't have said it publicly at all up until a couple of years ago, probably. So I really genuinely appreciate that for many people, it is a very, very hard thing to say that you have either witnessed or are a survivor of any sort of violence against you. But I think there is power in being able to say that, partly because it highlights that it is happening, like I've said, in all faith communities. And I hope that by speaking about it personally, it means that people would then feel able to speak out themselves if they hear me say it, as maybe as somebody who is has the privilege of being like a faith leader, if they hear me say it, they might think, all right, well, if I can go to her, I can tell her, or it's okay for me to speak out because she's a survivor, you know, and she's spoken out. Yeah, so I appreciate that that is quite a personal example, but I suppose it would be to say that to use your voice if you've got it and if you are able to, because there will be lots of people who don't, who are, for many reasons, aren't able to speak out. Thank you, Jenny. Abda, what would you say?
Oh God, so much really, and we haven't got enough time. But I think for me, if you've got sons, talk to your sons. I think that's one thing I'd say. I've got so the two boys that live with me, 21 and 17, and have regular chats with them about you know, not only how you treat women, but if you are walking along and it's dark and, you know, there's a woman in front of you, cross the road, she might not feel, you know, she might feel a bit anxious or a bit just little things like that. Men don't, or boys or young men don't always really understand or think about these things, because obviously as women, we think about these things all the time, but it won't occur to them a lot of the time. So I think it's about educating. Education kind of starts at home as well, doesn't it? So educating your boys, but also look out for your friends and your neighbours. If you can have a strategy, if you know somebody who's in that position, if you can have like a code word on the phone, like a code message, she needs help, you know, if you can store a getaway bag, if you know, if she has a plan to try and get away, you know, if you can help somebody who's in that situation, just to be there for them and let them do it in their own time, not pressurize them, but, you know, help them along the way, I think. And so many other things we could do: raise awareness, write about it, speak about it, as Jenny said, you know, every opportunity you get, you know, try and raise a profile and try and get other people to join in and make a difference. Thank you, Abda. Simon?
I think as faith leaders and as members of communities, you know, central to our daily lives is, you know, moral and ethical imperatives and the importance of doing good, the importance of looking after your neighbours. I mean, I think about a quote from one of the books of the Torah: "Do not stand idly on the blood of your neighbour," which is basically about third-party reporting, really. So I think, you know, I'd reinforce the fact of, if something doesn't seem right, then call it out. I think the thing that men and boys in communities need to do is listen to the voices, listen to the lived experiences of women and girls. Just don't assume that the way you're behaving is accepting. Listen to people. And for me, it's about raising this, what I still think is an area which is not spoken about as much, not only in faith communities, but generally, really. You know, a lot of people talk about, you know, crime figures and serious crime figures, but people don't often realise the small number of convictions for, you know, for rape, as Abda has mentioned previously. But it's about witnesses coming forward as well to increase, you know, the evidence base as well. So there's just so much we can do. But one thing I did want to say is, I think a really positive step is that the recent change to domestic abuse legislation has enshrined the refusal of the get, which is a Jewish divorce document, as coercive and controlling behaviour. And I think that is a massive, massive step forward. Wonderful.
Ravinder? I think from my perspective as the chair of Women of Faith Network, I would want, you know, every place of worship to be talking about the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. I would encourage, communities to be thinking how they can challenge that, how they can make men more aware that this is wrong, and also have some sort of, I don't know, anonymous book or something that women can say, yes, I'm experiencing it, or this particular phrase or this particular action by men or boys I don't like. And then that can be discussed within a community setting or within place of worships at the congregational level. But as Abda says, everything starts within the family. So, I mean, I've got 2 boys and a girl who are grown up, and yes, I taught them at a very, very young age as they grew up how they should be treating, their sister, and how they should be treating their mother and their grandmother, and etc. So it does stem from the family, and that means the father also being educated in the process as well.
It's been absolutely amazing to talk to you and hear about the fantastic work that you're all doing and continuing to do. As I said, it is a very tough subject to discuss and to listen to. So I would just like to reiterate the helpline numbers. And as you pointed out, Simon, it is always 999 if you are in danger, but there are also other helplines. So Jenny, if you'd like to start.
Yeah. There's the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which is 0808 2000 247, and then Staying Put, which offers support services for domestic and sexual abuse, and that is 0808 2800 999.
Simon.
So the JWA, Jewish Women's Aid numbers again, 0808 801 0500, and there's the web chat jwa.org.uk/web chat.
Thank you, Ravinder.
The Sikh helpline 07 999 004363, or the website www.sikhhelpline.com.
Thank you. And last but not least, Abda, please.
There's the Muslim Women's Network helpline, which is 0800 999 5786. And there's also Karma Nirvana, which is, bear with me, I seem to have mislaid the number, 0800 5999 247.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all we have for today's show. And I just want to say thank you once again for being my guests and for doing the amazing work that you do. Thank you so much, Reverend Jenny Ramsden, Simon Phillips, Ravinder Kaur Nijjar and Abda Khan. Continue to do the wonderful work that you do. So that was a show on the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. I'm Shamim Akhtar. I shall be back on the airwaves again soon, but for now, goodbye.